Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Wednesday, April 13th, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Oh Soo-young.
And I'm Lee Seung-jae. Over the next hour or so, we'll be covering some of the biggest news stories of the day and also get experts' insights on some of the key issues facing Korea and, of course, the rest of the world.
That's right. And, speaking of issues, Seung-jae, one that stood out to me is the incoming Yoon administration pursuing this change to the Korean age system. Quite pleased about that.
That's right. And I'm sure many of our viewers have seen the reports on this and certainly welcoming news for a lot of people out there and even myself, since I can actually knock off 2 years of my age right now.
Yeah, me too. Pretty pleased about that. And, well, not to mention when writing reports, it was always a bit confusing, whether to use their international age or their Korean age. But from now on, hopefully soon enough, one uniform age.
That's right. But the only drawback for me personally, I just taught my son who's, 3 or 4, whichever you say, that he's 4 years old. And now I have to teach him to say that he's 3 again. So it's going to be pretty tough.
Well, good luck with that. And, well, let's take a look at this morning's headlines.
Coming up on New Day at Arirang. Ukraine says Russia has used chemical weapons on the port city of Mariupol, causing troops and civilians to develop respiratory illnesses. The city's mayor also said more than 10,000 civilians have died in his city, but the figure could surpass 20,000 as attacks continue. The U.S. State Department said in its annual report released Tuesday that North Korea continues to seriously restrict and violate the human rights of its citizens. It added there were significant human rights issues in nearly all aspects of life for its citizens. South Korea reported less than 200,000 new COVID-19 cases as of 9 p.m. Tuesday. Meanwhile, health authorities will announce later today plans for a 4th round of vaccinations for high-risk groups.
There have been unconfirmed reports that Russia might have used chemical weapons against Ukraine in Mariupol. Western countries are urgently investigating these claims.
That's right, and this comes as Russia looks to continue its invasion, with President Vladimir Putin saying peace talks had reached a dead end. For this, Kim Sung-min with the top story.
Amid growing claims that Russia has used chemical weapons in Ukraine, the U.S. says it was not in a position to confirm this yet. That's according to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Tuesday, adding that the U.S. is still investigating whether Russia used chemical weapons. This comes as Ukraine had said earlier that it was checking unverified information that Russia might have used chemical weapons in the southeastern port city of Mariupol, where massive civilian killings have been reported. The city's mayor says more than 10,000 civilians have been killed in the Russian siege of the city. Meanwhile, analysis by Britain's defense ministry suggests that the fighting in eastern Ukraine will intensify over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Russia has been redirecting its offensive to Luhansk and Donetsk after retreating from around the capital Kyiv. With attacks poised to launch soon, diplomatic hopes are seemingly fading. Speaking at a joint press conference with the president of Belarus on Tuesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin said peace talks with Ukraine had reached a, quote, dead end, adding that Russia will persist with its invasion. He also once again dismissed the evidence of Russian atrocities in Bucha as, quote, fake, claiming that the images of dead bodies had been staged by Ukraine. His remarks come as atrocities potentially committed by Russia in several cities like Bucha have come into sharper focus as more evidence is being discovered. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
The United States has criticized North Korea's human rights practices in an annual report published Tuesday, saying the regime continues to systematically abuse its citizens. Kim Yo-sun has more.
Washington has criticized Pyongyang for seriously violating the human rights of its citizens. In an annual report released Tuesday, the U.S. State Department explained that human rights abuses and corruption continue to be a widespread problem in North Korea. The 2021 country report on human rights practices added that the regime failed to take credible steps to prosecute officials who committed human rights abuses or corruption. It further elaborated that there were significant human rights issues in nearly all aspects of life, ranging from respect for human integrity to respect for political and religious freedoms. The report also said that the North parliamentary election held in 2019 was neither free nor fair. Speaking to journalists about the report, Lisa Peterson, Acting Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, said the U.S. will continue to raise global awareness about the gross human rights violations in the North. The official also noted the fact that Washington recognizes North Korea as being among the most repressive authoritarian states in the world. She expressed hope for justice to be achieved for the people of the North. While U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken said the reports painted a clear picture of where human rights and democracy are under threat, he did not directly mention the North's human rights conditions. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
North Korea has continued to test and develop ballistic missiles, using its space program as a cover, according to U.S. military sources. In a rare unclassified report, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency said Tuesday that the North's space program provides the regime with valuable data that can be applied to the development of long-range and multi-stage ballistic missiles. The report added that multiple North Korean hacker groups have been targeting aerospace firms and space technology. The report warned that such activities could enable the regime to further advance its weapons, space system and procurement programs.
Now, in the meantime, U.S. has sent a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, into waters near South Korea in an apparent show of force to deter possible provocations by North Korea. Seoul and Washington also started a preliminary military drill ahead of their full-scale joint exercise later this month. Ji has the full story.
The U.S. Navy's Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is in the East Sea in response to signs of North Korea resuming nuclear tests. According to sources, it is currently in international waters east of South Korea's Ulsan city. The U.S. Naval Institute also said Monday local time that the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group had entered waters between South Korea and Japan. It said that after a resumption of missile tests by North Korea following a pause of several years, ICBM and nuclear tests are anticipated in the near term. This is the first time in more than 4 years that the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group has entered the East Sea, after a previous deployment there in November 2017. The U.S. Navy ship will reportedly stay in the East Sea for 5 days. When asked about the matter, the Defense Ministry did not give further details, but did confirm that it is currently in the international waters near the country.
It is in the international waters in the East Sea, but this is a U.S. strategic asset, so I don't think it would be appropriate for us to mention further details about this.
On Tuesday, South Korea and the U.S. kicked off crisis management staff training, a preliminary exercise ahead of a full-scale joint military drill. The exercise will last for 4 days until Friday. The two countries will likely hold the main drill or computer-simulated combined command post training next week from April 18th to 28th. Ji, Arirang News.
President Joe Biden could visit South Korea next month when he's set to attend the Quad Summit over in Tokyo. Now, before that, high-ranking officials from Washington are reportedly coming to Seoul next week to discuss North Korea issues. For details, let's turn to our Kim Da-mi.
U.S. President Joe Biden could be coming to Seoul for a first summit with South Korea's President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol next month, sometime around the time Biden is in Japan for the Quad Summit. According to Reuters, Biden said when speaking to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi during virtual talks on Monday that he is looking forward to meeting him in Japan on or around May 24th. If Biden does come to Seoul around then, it'll be the soonest a U.S. leader has visited any new South Korean administration. An official from South Korea's foreign ministry said Tuesday Seoul will welcome Washington's offer of a summit regardless of time. Yoon's top envoy, who traveled to the U.S. last week, also said the allies agreed on the need for a summit at an early date. Following the latest 8-day U.S. visit by Yoon's delegation, Washington's top nuclear envoy Sung Kim and Deputy U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Jung Pak will reportedly come to Seoul early next week. Kim is expected to sit down with South Korean counterpart Roh Kyu-duk during his 4-day visit. Discussions on North Korea policies with Yoon's transmission committee will likely top the agenda. The two sides are also expected to exchange views on how to deal with additional military activities by North Korea, especially ahead of Pyongyang's 110th birth anniversary of the regime's founding leader Kim Il-sung this Friday. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Among the many issues brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, deepening polarization in society is something Koreans are struggling with the most.
But how do we deal with the situation, and how can the incoming Yoon administration help ease the problem? For this, we connect with Park Shin-young, Director of the Regional Cooperation and Integration Division at the Asia Development Bank. Thank you very much for joining us today, Director Park. It's lovely to see you. And well,
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And first off, well, over the more than 2 years of the pandemic that this world has experienced, who would you say has been the most impacted by this deepening social divide?
Well, thank you very much. And then, well, the COVID pandemic has pushed additional 80 million people in Asia Pacific into extreme poverty. The pandemic is really, in a way, discriminatory, that has pushed people in poverty, and also the groups that have been socially and economically vulnerable into further difficult situations during the pandemic. Those have been really experiencing the inequality over the past several decades are those ones who have been economically and socially the entrenched structural inequality, the ones that have been hardly hit by they have been the most hard hit during the pandemic.
So, Director Park, I think education is another sector that has been really impacted by the deepening polarization due to the COVID-19 pandemic. You see that some of the families who are more well-off, they're able to afford better private education for their children. But the truth is, I mean, this is something that's been going on here in South Korea for some quite time now. Do you think maybe in terms of the education sector, the polarization in that aspect is something that's going to continue even post-pandemic era?
It is very unfortunate because, in fact, around the world, 200 million kids have been finding very difficult to access to education. They were shut out of school and lost education, and lost school years will translate into their loss of income and productivity of the economy over the long run. This long-term scarring effect has been already documented in many reports that ADB has produced, and then World Bank have produced. These even over the next 20, 30 years, will have the impact on the division, social divide, and an inequality. This is, as you mentioned, very closely related with socially entrenched the inequality, and this stratification has been already shown in the access to the digital school. Especially online schooling has been a challenge for low and middle income households around the world, and those will have very significant impact on the loss of the income, and the economies have to support the recovery of the lost education and school hours of the next the recovery phase.
And Director Park, with a new government to take office next month in South Korea, there's high expectations for change, and of course people want their livelihoods to improve. But of course the incoming administration is traditionally a conservative one, a bit pro-business rather than pro-welfare. So how do you expect to see the incoming Yoon government deal with social inequality?
Well, social inequality is actually very multi-dimensional challenges. It's not easy to just pick like one policy, one aspect to change that, really the entrenched, the long structured the inequality overnight. So the in fact, the policies that promote growth and create new jobs, new opportunities, and also the potential for social mobility are very important. So in this sense, I do hope that the new incoming government focusing on the growth will positively influence on these addressing these issues. Nevertheless, the growth has to be also inclusive. The policies that promote growth have to be human-centered. They have to really focus on the job creation, improving the quality of jobs. And to do so, you need to invest in a human capital. You need to really invest in education, health. At the same time, the policies that support creating the opportunities and then allowing people to access to new opportunities are going to be very important. The education, skills, training are definitely one of them, but at the same time, the policies that that encourage the entry and remove the barriers to entry to new businesses, and then fostering the entrepreneurship and then the new startups are going to also help. There are many the policies that can ensure the level playing field for the businesses, especially in Korea. The nearly like the about 44 the small businesses for like a 자영업자, self-employed, and those have to be also supported during the recovery phase, so that they get the new opportunity, they get the second chances. So that also helps. At the same time, the taxes and then social transfers are playing important role in addressing the inequality. There are many distortions in Korean taxation, and then I do feel more optimistic about removing those distortions in the taxation through the reforms and strengthening the transfers. I've had some studies looking at the taxes and then transfers in Korea over the past few years, and that has been positively addressing the inequality given the after-tax income. So that trend can continue.
Certainly, like you said, it is very multi-dimensional with these problems, so many things to tackle at this time. Director Park, unfortunately, we are out of time, but we do thank you very much for your insight, and hopefully we do see a solution moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
South Korea detected its first case of a coronavirus variant called XL, an Omicron strain first reported in the United Kingdom. The daily tally was above 200,000 again in South Korea on Tuesday, but we're still on a downward trend and schools are easing select measures. Kim Bo-kyung has this story.
South Korea on Tuesday confirmed its very first case of the new Omicron hybrid variant XL. The person was reportedly fully vaccinated with a booster shot and had no recent travel history, but tested positive on the 23rd of last month without any symptoms. The XL variant was first detected in Britain in February, and the number of such cases worldwide has since jumped to at least 66, according to the World Health Organization. Yet one expert says the new variant is not expected to have much of an impact.
So far as we've noticed that it is not more transmissible than the original variant, and also in regards to the severity it causes, I don't think it's any more severe than the original the variants as well. So I don't think there isn't a much to worry about the occurrence of XL subvariant.
Yet he added, as there could be more variants to come, health authorities need to keep a close watch. Meanwhile, the country reported 210,755 cases on Tuesday, almost double the tally from the previous day, which was much lower due to fewer tests over the weekend. This figure, however, is the lowest for a Tuesday for 5 weeks and keeps the nation's weekly average in the 203,000 range, which has been on a downward trend since mid-March. Meanwhile, the Education Ministry has decided to loosen social distancing measures in schools. Previously, all students in the same class as a confirmed case had to take 3 COVID-19 tests in the space of 7 days. But starting April 18th, only those with symptoms or those with high-risk underlying illnesses will have to take a test, and just 2 over 5 days. The preemptive rapid antigen test students had to do twice a week before coming to school ever since the new semester started will also change to just once a week. When it comes to the nation's reinfection rate, health authorities announced that 0.284% of the total confirmed patients have been reinfected more than twice. Among around 9.2 million accumulated cases from January 2020 to March 19th this year, 26,239 have been reinfected, and out of the number, 37 have contracted the virus 3 times. For further protection and control, South Korean health authorities are set to announce plans for a 4th round of vaccinations, focusing on high-risk groups. While 4th shots are already being administered, the country is aiming to expand the program to include more senior citizens. This comes while people aged 60 or older now account for around 20% of the new cases and 95% of COVID-19 deaths. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Now moving on to the incoming administration, names for almost half the cabinet has already been announced. Now the incoming leader will soon reveal nominations to fill out remaining key posts. Those would include the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Unification. Yoon Jung-min provides a glimpse of what to expect.
More nominations are likely to be announced soon for President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's cabinet, including the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Unification. Yoon announced 8 nominees this past weekend, and he's expected to announce the remaining 10 on Wednesday. Lawmaker Park Jin of the People Power Party will reportedly be nominated as foreign minister, and it's widely speculated that lawmaker Cho Tae-yong will be tapped as ambassador to the United States. Both of them were part of the delegation Yoon sent to the U.S. recently. To head the Ministry of Unification, lawmaker Kwon Young-se and former Vice Unification Minister Kim Chun-sik are reportedly among the candidates. Other top posts likely to be announced include those for the Justice Ministry, the Education Ministry, and the Ministry of Interior and Safety. Politicians are likely to be excluded from the candidates for the Justice Ministry and the Ministry of Interior Safety to guarantee political independence ahead of local elections in June. Nominations for presidential secretaries could come separately from the cabinet posts, possibly later this week. There's a chance that Yoon could name as his first chief of staff Kim Dae-gi, who served previously as senior secretary for economic affairs and chief of staff for policy under the Lee Myung-bak administration. Once all the nominations for the president-elect's cabinet are in, preparations will speed up for their confirmation hearings at the National Assembly. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. As the war in Ukraine continues, there's been a growing sense of dread that Russia is about to launch a major offensive with the eastern regions of Ukraine in its sight. There have been disturbing, unconfirmed reports of chemical weapons being used, which allied countries are now trying to verify. Kyiv has called for heavier weapons and more assistance for its air force. And President Zelensky made an appeal to the South Korean parliament this week via video, calling for greater help from Seoul. We break down what many see as a very decisive moment in this war and South Korea's role in it as well. We connect with Melinda Herring, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, and Mason Ritchie, Associate Professor of International Politics at Hangul University of Foreign Studies. Thank you both so much for joining us this morning. And well, let's start with you, Director Herring. Now, we've heard very disturbing though unconfirmed reports that Russia may have used chemical weapons. Now, President Biden last month, he said on the 24th that the United States would respond if such an attack occurred. If the reports are true, then, Director, what options are on the table right now?
Good morning, and thanks for having me back on your show. So we don't know. President Biden said that if chemical weapons are used, that there would be severe consequences. No one knows, and a lot of people think it's good that there's some ambiguity, that he has a wide range of options. I personally don't think that that's the wisest option. With Vladimir Putin, you need to be really explicit. But we still don't know if they use chemical weapons. The bottom line is that it's completely within reason that they have. They've used chemical weapons in other parts of the world, and we think that they were very frustrated that the Ukrainian soldiers in Mariupol would not give up. There were online reports of people from the People's Republic in eastern Ukraine saying that we have to use chemical weapons in order to get the Ukrainians to finally give up.
And Director Herring, now it seems a major attack by the Russians is imminent, and the UK has said that it expects fighting to intensify over the next 2 to 3 weeks. How have Russian troops recently been regrouping, and what kind of scenario are you expecting to see unfold?
So phase one is over, and the Ukrainians won phase one. Phase two is going to be quite a bit different, and I'm really concerned about phase two. So phase one favored the Ukrainian forces because they're smaller, nimble, they have civilian command structure, they have parliamentary oversight, they know how to work in smaller groups, and they were able to attack Russia's long convoys. Phase two is going to benefit the Russians. So the Ukrainians don't have as many men and as much artillery systems, planes, tanks. The second phase of this conflict is going to look a lot more like World War II, unfortunately. So that's why it's imperative right now for Seoul, for Washington, for Brussels, for Paris, to get as many planes, armored vehicles, S-300s, the anti-aircraft systems, the artillery systems that Kiev is requesting there as soon as possible. The Ukrainian side is expecting Moscow to escalate big time on the 14th, so in 2 days.
And certainly President Zelensky has been making a personal appeal to many countries around the world. And Professor Ritchie, one of those countries includes South Korea, where the Ukrainian president made a video address to the parliament on Monday. And well, I wonder what you made of this video appeal and what this signifies about South Korea's expected role.
Sure. I think I would say three things. The first of which is that Zelensky here in South Korea, as he's done in other countries, has appealed to the national experience here in order to tug at the heartstrings of lawmakers and politicians. He did this in the UK, and Japan, and Germany, and the U.S., invoking Pearl Harbor, using the rhetoric from Winston Churchill in the case of Great Britain. Here in South Korea, of course, he referenced the Korean War and the division of the country, which it seems as though Russia might be trying to do in Ukraine. The second thing is, of course, that this was an expected step coming at a critical time in the Russia-Ukraine war, as you just pointed out. Ukraine's material is probably running low. The Russians have retrenched and regrouped away from Kiev and are, as we just heard, launching phase two. Ukraine, for its part, is looking to a counteroffensive in some places, and then looking to defend as best it can, especially in the eastern region. So it needs external support. And then thirdly, what this means for South Korea is, of course, it indicates that South Korea, has a potentially global role to play in security affairs. It means that South Korea is considered, quote unquote, on the right side of history. However, I would say that, frankly speaking, South Korea sort of embarrassed itself in this speech. The National Assembly turnout was really a disappointment. Only about 60 out of 300 lawmakers showed up. And I really think that might in some way be reflective of a political distraction here, but also, frankly, perhaps of the fact that the population here doesn't consider this to be a very pressing or critical issue.
But even so, many South Korean citizens have shown strong concern and they voice support for Ukrainians. And Professor Ritchie, how does the Ukraine crisis right now resonate with South Koreans, given their own history of fighting for liberation from Japanese colonization and also their decades-long fight for democracy?
Sure. So, I'm not going to paint with a broad brush and say, people in general or all Koreans don't really seem to care about this very much. Indeed, popular support for Ukraine is in theory high, but the population hasn't had to really face any sacrifices for that so far. I don't think it's still considered to be a critical issue for most people. Rather, they're concerned more about housing costs and inflation and domestic political issues, which is in some sense normal, of course. But again, this National Assembly turnout, I think, was, frankly speaking, kind of disgraceful. It wasn't the address wasn't even broadcast into the main conference hall. As I mentioned, turnout was low. And we have to remember, South Korea is a country that has been asking the rest of the world to support an end-of-war declaration in its own country with respect to North Korea. And of course, had 16 countries which sent combat forces during the 1950 to 1953 war. So the fact that you can't get a full house in the National Assembly is, I think, kind of sad, to be totally honest with you.
Well, it might be a funny time in South Korean politics, seeing as it's a time of transition with a new conservative government coming in, which has fortunately expressed more support for the efforts of the Ukrainians. And over in Ukraine, though, of course, the situation is just terribly serious at the moment. And Director Herring, now, there was news that Russia now has a new top general who's going to be leading the war in Ukraine on the Russian side. And well, it's drawn a lot of concern because he has quite a reputation now. Who is this person and what is his strategy?
So he's known as the Butcher of Aleppo, and he also made his name in Chechnya as well. He has a terrible reputation for being willing to kill civilians. He is indiscriminate, and he will flatten cities. So this is a big deal. Part of the reason why the Ukrainians did so well in phase one is that there were at least 4 different Russian generals, and they weren't communicating very well. And Vladimir Putin learned his lesson, and he's consolidated power, and he has one general in charge now. So all eyes are on the Donbass, on eastern Ukraine right now. And a lot of analysts think that Vladimir Putin needs to make real gains before by Victory Day in early May. He has to show something because he's lost a lot of troops, and this has been very expensive and cost the average Russian a lot in their own individual bank accounts. So Mariupol needs to fall, that city in southeastern Ukraine that is besieged and has been besieged for 47 days. And he also needs to make some gains in the Donbass before that deadline.
And Director Herring, there's growing concern that when the Russians attack in full force in the Donbas region as well, it's not going to be like before where they were fighting in areas where the Ukrainians had an advantage because they'll be out on open fields. How do you think the strategy will change? And also, Ukraine has been calling for heavier weapons, more weapon support, and also air support. What kind of support do they need exactly? And will the current level of support they're getting from the West be enough?
So to cut to the chase, no. The Ukrainians don't have the weapons that they need for phase 2, and they desperately need Seoul, Washington, Berlin, Paris to open up and start sending real weapons. I know there's a debate in Seoul and one in Washington as well, and a lot of policymakers want to divide aid into defensive weapons and then escalatory weapons. And there's been a hesitation to send escalatory weapons. I'm sorry, but when you go to the Donbass, when you go to Kiev, this distinction doesn't make any sense. I know that South Korea needs to defend itself. We in Washington need to have ample defense as well. But this is the time. The next 3 weeks are absolutely crucial. If Vladimir Putin is not stopped in the Donbass, he's going to level Kharkiv. He's going to level Kiev. And then yesterday or the day before, one of his top advisors gave an interview and they said, we're going to go after Europe next. So it's absolutely imperative that the West and Seoul and all the friends of Ukraine send planes, armored vehicles, S-300s, the anti-aircraft systems, the multiple rocket launch systems. There's a whole list of equipment that Kiev needs desperately in the next few days.
And the Ukrainian government has made this list very transparent, and they've been calling for these weapon support. And, well, Professor Ritchie, South Korea said that it could not provide lethal weapons to Ukraine due to its own security and military situation here in the Korean Peninsula. But to what extent can it provide military assistance?
Well, so far, Seoul has provided non-lethal material shipments, including bulletproof helmets, medical supplies, tents, blankets. It's made a $30 million commitment to financial aid for Ukraine. Private citizen donations have come in. And of course, Seoul, after a little bit of delay at first, has jumped on board more or less fully with sanctions support and diplomatic support for Ukraine. But that's not what Zelensky wants, as Deputy Director Herring just pointed out. Now, what he wants is lethal materiel. Frankly speaking, it seems hard to believe that South Korea can't spare some material. I don't completely believe the story that South Korea needs these weapon systems for its own defenses. But I think that there's an important question about what types of systems Ukraine can actually use. Ukraine is asking for anti-missile defenses. But frankly, this seems like a stretch for South Korea regarding, for instance, the need for training that Ukrainian soldiers would need with the particular systems here. The same thing might be the case for tanks. The story is potentially different for easier to use systems, such as portable air defense systems and perhaps some anti-tank weapons. Ukraine has also asked for self-propelled artillery, Harpoon anti-missile systems. Here, I think the devil's in the details in terms of how many South Korea has, what it might be able to share, what the training level would be in terms of Ukrainian soldiers to train up on these systems. But in any event, South Korea doesn't seem inclined to offer these systems. So I don't think that Zelensky should count on Seoul to be delivering any of these lethal systems that he's just asked for.
Well, on that note, Professor Ritchie, now South Korea's initial response to the Ukraine crisis under the incumbent Moon government was admittedly bumpy. How will the incoming president, though, the Yoon administration, which has voiced stronger support for Ukraine, really handle things hopefully differently?
So, I've been on Arirang several times before. And I have talked to some degree about what the Yoon administration might be looking to do in terms of its foreign policy. It has referred to itself as wanting to lead South Korea to become a quote-unquote global pivotal state. And I think here we're really seeing the rubber hit the road. We're going to see whether or not the incoming Yoon administration and his foreign and security and defense policy team are going to be able to back up that aspiration. They want more global alliance multilateralism, so piggybacking on the U.S. ROC alliance. But I think that the challenges that Yoon faces in the first place are going to be popular. He's going to have to get the population to jump behind Ukraine more. He's going to have to perhaps use some political capital if he wants to be more engaged in Ukraine. And of course, the situation in Ukraine on the ground might change, and that might change the imperatives that the Yoon administration will have to face. But as we saw, only having 60 out of 300 lawmakers there indicates at the very least the first thing he's going to have to do is rhetorically explain to everyone in the world why it's critical for South Korea to be engaged in Ukraine more. And of course, we're not exactly sure whether or not he thinks that's the case. So I think that right now this is still an open question.
And Director Herring, how long do you think Vladimir Putin will or can sustain this war?
So that's a great question. Some analysts think that he has army forces, capable army forces that can be sustained for the next 2 to 3 months. He has about 300,000 army troops. 150,000 of them have been deployed. He can draft as many people as he wants, but those draftees are not going to be trained, and they're going to be very green, inexperienced, and there will be a very high casualty rate. And he also has some limitations on him. He has not declared war. He's called this a special military operation or a special operation. And legally, constitutionally, he can't engage in conscription. Now, I'm sure he can find a way around it. I'm sure his lawyers can find a way around it. But there is sort of a question about Russian public opinion. If he does try to draft people, will the Russian public opinion put up with it? Between 70 and 80% of Russians support the war. but it's going to be a hard case to make that everything is hunky-dory, everything is going well, but we need a draft. So I have doubt about the wisdom, the political wisdom of conscription. Now, wars in this part of the world have a tendency to drag on much longer than they should and be much deadlier than they should. So we should not be talking about this in days or weeks, but I fear it's going to be months and maybe even years, unfortunately. I wish that weren't the case. But if you read Vladimir Putin's, the folks around him carefully, they're all saying that we are going to systematically level Ukraine city by city. We're not giving up. Our strategy may have changed. We're going to focus on the Donbass, but our goals haven't changed. And once we finish that, then we're going to come after Europe. So it's a very menacing picture. The threat from Moscow is long term, and we need to be wise in the way that we deal with it. And we need to realize that this is not just about Ukraine. That's why it's imperative for Seoul's government to get involved, and it's imperative for all of Ukraine's Western friends to get involved and do more than just send humanitarian aid.
That was Melinda Herring, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre, and Mason Ritchie, Associate Professor of International Politics at Hanguk University of Foreign Studies. Thank you both again so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, prices in the United States have risen to their highest level since 1981, up 8.5% in March from a year ago. Now, according to the Labor Department on Tuesday, the rise in consumer prices have been driven up by continuing supply chain problems, soaring demand, and rising energy prices. It also pointed to the war in Ukraine for its effect on an increase in energy costs. Now, from February to March of this year, inflation rose 1.2%, the biggest month-to-month jump since 2005. Now, while many countries around the world are gradually lifting COVID-19 related travel restrictions, a major international aviation legal seminar is being held here in South Korea. Now, the focus is on boosting recovery of the industry in the post-pandemic era. Ji-young brings us the highlights from that very session.
With borders reopening and international travel picking up again, the global aviation industry is gearing up for a major rebound from the COVID-19 crisis. Key decision makers and legal experts from the global aviation sector have gathered in Seoul for the 2022 International Civil Aviation Organization Legal Seminar. The three-day seminar held in Seoul is the first face-to-face meeting of its kind since the start of the pandemic, with some 800 officials from a dozen nations exploring how to move forward in the post-pandemic era. Governed by the UN, the ICAO, which is made up of 193 member countries, got the seminar underway on Tuesday in cooperation with South Korea's Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. The goal is to facilitate a quick and full return to pre-pandemic air traffic levels, but with safe protocols in place.
We need to promptly recover the harmonization of the requirements for international travel and be able to give assurances to governments, health authorities, the traveling public, that the protocols in place cover sufficiently the need or the risks that are generated and are safe.
The Secretary General also congratulated South Korea on 70 years in the ICAO. At the event, the Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport noted the aviation industry's efforts that have been in place to cope with the pandemic.
For the recovery of the aviation industry, governments around the world have come up with many support measures, including financial aid. They have also eased restrictions to turn grounded passenger fleets to transport cargo. And to overcome the struggles and keep the aviation network alive, countries have created travel bubbles.
He added that South Korea, ranking 5th globally in terms of aviation traffic volume will continue to help boost cooperation. The country plans to secure an 8th term at the ICAO Council to contribute more for the advancement of the aviation industry. 엄지영, 아리랑 뉴스.
For a look at news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Good morning to you, Matthew. Now, let's start things off with news coming out of New York City here. Very concerning. A masked gunman setting off a smoke bomb and then opening fire in one of the city's subway cars.
Well, that's right, SJ. So the shooting occurred near the city's 36th Street station on the R train during New York's morning commute on Tuesday. Now, 10 people were shot, with 29 people treated at a nearby hospital for their injuries, and authorities are still searching for the suspect, described as a black male with a heavy build, wearing green construction-like vest and a hooded sweatshirt. Now, video footage of the scene showed smoke pouring out of the arriving train car, with riders struggling to escape. Police said yesterday that the shooting isn't currently being investigated as a terrorist act, and it comes as the city has witnessed a string of gun-related violence over the past few months, including attacks on its transit system. Turning over to South Africa, where the country's eastern coastal province KwaZulu-Natal is seeing heavy flooding, and that is following days of torrential downpours. Now, according to reports on Tuesday, at least 45 people have been killed and dozens are missing, with fears the number of casualties may be even higher. Homes and roads have also been swept away by floods and mudslides, with evacuation efforts underway in disaster-prone areas. Power generation capabilities have also been compromised as local dams filled beyond capacity, limiting hydroelectric generators. South Africa's weather service said downpours will weaken on Wednesday, but rain will return at the weekend. In January, floods in the coastal city of East London killed 10 people and left hundreds homeless. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Finance Minister Rishi Sunak were handed fines on Tuesday for breaking COVID-19 lockdown rules, making Johnson the first sitting Prime Minister to be sanctioned for breaking the law. The penalties follow an investigation by authorities into illegal parties at Downing Street that broke social distancing rules. So far, more than 50 fines related to the controversy have been handed out, with more expected. Johnson has since spoken out on the matter, saying that it had not occurred to him that he was in breach of the rules for what was a brief gathering with co-workers and that he had paid the fine. The European Space Agency on Tuesday officially opened a new center for space safety in the town of Darmstadt in Germany, with the goal of averting danger and facilitating security for essential infrastructure in space. Located in the same area as the European Space Operations Center, the new facility will monitor satellite instruments that measure space weather, which are cosmic events that affect Earth, like solar storms. According to scientists, damage caused to sensitive instruments by such events can result in costs of over $16 billion and may affect electronics in space and even here on Earth. The facility will also provide an opportunity for young engineers in the field to practice their skills.
Good morning. Wednesday is shaping up to be a dark and rainy day. Right now, wet clouds are dropping showers in parts of the capital and Gangwon-do province, but rain will gradually spread south as the day moves along. Jeju will see heavy rain of up to 60 millimeters into tomorrow, 5 to 40 millimeters for elsewhere, and spotty rain in the capital. Meanwhile, the mountainous regions in Gangwon-do province could see some light snowfall today. Well, this round of rain brings sweet April showers, which gave much needed relief to the dryness to most parts of the country and a cool down following the early mini heat wave. Temperatures are returning to norms today and we'll have more time to enjoy pleasant springtime. In fact, for today, we won't see much difference between our lows and highs, starting out in the low to mid-teens across much of the country. Highs will be 3 to 4 degrees higher than morning temperatures, but about 10 to 15 degrees lower than yesterday afternoon. Well, Daegu saw a high of 30 degrees yesterday, but will top out at 15 degrees this afternoon. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for us, but we will be back the same time tomorrow for our Thursday's edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Oh Seong.
And I'm Lee Seung-jae. Thanks again for tuning in, and always have a great rest of your day. And until next time, do take care.